All right, everybody. Welcome to our first flip lecture for the 2013-2014 school year. You are in APES, and what I'm going to do with these first few lectures is pretty much sum up what your summer homework would have been, and which covers actually chapters 1, 2, 3, and a little bit of 4. So I just wanted to start out with chapter 1, and it has to do with the environmental issues that we face, what causes them, and sustainability. And so I wanted to talk about, first, before I start that, is what is environmental science? So again, this is lecture 1, flip lecture number 1. And again, we're going to go ahead and start this. So what is environmental science? Well, environmental science is definitely a unique type of science that involves many subject areas. It involves chemistry, physics, geology, biology, ecology. Let's see what else. And law, which we will get into at the end of the year, and government. So these are just to name a few. Actually, there's much more, but just to kind of sum it up, it involves many. So this is what we call a multidisciplinary. Sorry, this is summertime right now, and I haven't used this in a while, so uh, bear with me. It's definitely a multidisciplinary science, which I think is interesting because it doesn't just focus on one, it focuses on many things and it actually puts them all together. Where we look at Earth and its systems in an interdependent approach, where we find that things that happen chemically, let's say, for example, in a river, definitely would affect the biology of the river. And even the interaction of organisms with their environment, which is ecology. That also would be connected to law because if there were some chemicals that were dumped into a river in the United States and we found out about it, the law would kick in. And that we actually have a perfect example of that, which happened in the Rocky River down near Strongsville when a mint company, which is this company that made coins, dumped cyanide into the Rocky River. All of a sudden, thousands of fish were dead. The fishermen that were in the river reported it, and so then the powers that be came in and detected it and then traced it all the way back to this company right on Prospect Road in Strongsville. So that's an example of environmental science, quite honestly. The chemistry of the water was changed, which led to a change in the life that lived in the river. And then that led to definitely a change in the ecology of the entire ecosystem there, where if there's less fish, then the birds are hungry because there's less fish. Or if the birds eat the fish, that could lead to even more problems, which we'll get into later. It's called biomagnification. So that definitely is a perfect example of environmental science, which I'm very excited to share with you guys this year. Now, another thing I want to mention is what, um, when we look at the environment, what are pretty much the areas in environmental science that kind of are players in environmental science? And like I mentioned before, there's ecology or ecologists. They are a key player in environmental science. They study the relationships between living things and their environment. If you think back to biology, living things are called biotic and non-living things are called abiotic. So an ecologist in environmental science would study these interactions that we see between the living world and the non-living world. So examples of biotic would be like a walleye, a perch, a crayfish, whereas abiotic would be something like the water quality, the amount of sun it gets, the dissolved oxygen specifically for water quality, the pH, the temperature, which I may have said already, the flow, the rate of flow, those types of things are abiotic. Then an environmental scientist is one who uses the information from the physical sciences and social sciences to understand how the earth works and learn how humans interact with it, and then develop solutions. So in environmental science, pretty much environmental scientists looks into how the earth works, okay? How does it work? What have we done to it? Usually it's in a negative sense. Um, but we're starting to see positive things as a result of what we've done to it as a result of healing it. And then what are these solutions? So it's kind of like an environmental scientist is like a person, like a detective that's trying to solve a murder case. That's a specific example of somebody getting murdered who are the suspects. An environmental scientist does the same thing, but for the earth in a sense, where what are some things that we've done to it to make it um, unhealthy? And then what are some solutions? And the solutions part is really interesting because they've come up with some real creative things. An example of a solution is they've noticed that in urban areas in the United States, the air quality is awful, especially in the middle of the summer when it's really hot and you have all of this industry putting out heat, putting out pollutants into the air. You also have a lot of impermeable surface and dark surfaces in an urban area that hold heat. And when it does rain, the water runs off super fast and causes flash floods. So they realize that it's pretty much a little island of pollution. And so one way to reduce the amount of pollution in an urban area is to plant trees. It's a very simple approach. But what they found is that you can't just plant any tree because trees range in their ability to withstand types of pollutants. And they found that all across the board, not just with plants. So there's plants that are what we call generalist plants, or even for any other species, generalist species. And these are species that can withstand a wide range of tolerance. If it's about water, the amount of sunlight, the amount of heat, they can handle it. So a typical generalist would be like a seagull, which is really called a ring-billed gull, specifically here in Lake Erie, squirrels, the American robin, um, a pear tree, which is not the type of tree that bears pear the fruit, but it's just a type of pear tree. And these are all generalists because they can withstand a lot of pollution, they can withstand human contact, they can withstand all different kinds of things. So, with this air quality problem in urban areas, they realized, well, if we just plant trees, it'll be fine. So they decided to do some research, and they found that the pear tree actually is a pretty hardy tree. They also refer to it as hardy, Hardy, which means again that they have a wide range of tolerance. So instead of planting trees that have a narrow range of tolerance, which would die right away in an urban area, they plant trees that can withstand such conditions, extreme conditions. And that's the solution. So what they did was they planted them, and not only did they take in pollutants, but and they convert them into other things in their biomass. So they would take in the pollutants, but they also provided shade. And by providing shade, it reduced energy costs for nearby buildings because then the building is less hot, and so as a result, you don't need to spend so much money on cooling it. Um, they also found that conifers, any type of cone-bearing tree, specific cone-bearing trees, I should say, which hold their leaves all year, if you plant them on the northwest side of buildings, especially here in Cleveland, they will definitely provide shade in the summer, but also provide protection in the winter when we get those really cold polar northwest winds that come down. By breaking up the wind velocity, it also reduces the amount of heat that's going to be needed to heat the building. So all different kinds of things where you're taking into account the life and the services, the ecological services that life would provide us to make our lives easier. So these are, again, different types of solutions to that. They also found not only did it help with pollution and shade, but it also helped with runoff. And runoff is basically when water hits the ground, instead of going into the ground, into a permeable surface, it actually runs off. And with trees, we know that they have roots and they are in soil, and the soil in the mulch is exposed to the elements. So therefore, the raindrops would seep into the ground instead of running off the ground. and then that would reduce flooding. It would also reduce the amount of pollutants entering waterways, and I could go on and on and on. Okay, so that is the job of an environmentalist, environmental scientist. Okay. Um, the next thing I want to talk about is preservation versus conservation, and this will be the last thing I talk about because this cuts off at 15 minutes. So a preservationist is also a key player in environmental science, and a preservationist is concerned primarily with setting aside and protecting large areas of land that are natural and undisturbed and keep them away from human activities. So a preservationist um, is all about protecting nature, but not allowing human activities to take place in those areas. So an example of that would be like a wildlife refuge. Wildlife refuges we have all throughout the Cleveland Metro Parks and all over the United States, and we are not allowed in those areas. So they are completely cut off from human activity, okay? Which is definitely important because there's some species that just cannot handle human contact. On the other hand, there's conservationists, and this type of key player is using the natural areas, using wildlife areas, sustaining them, managing them for current generations and future generations and for other forms of life. So conservationists are like preservationists, except for the fact that conservationists take into account human activities. And we need conservation areas because it provides us with an educational opportunity when we're there to appreciate it. And then we can pass on that knowledge to future generations. So it's important for us to be in natural areas and to experience natural areas so that we can continue to save it for future generations. Preservationist, again, is just about the plants and animals. Okay? So I'm going to stop right now.